Yeah. Hello, good afternoon from Jakarta. Welcome to FPCI Virtual Public Discussions on AUKUS Responses from Southeast Asia. Let me introduce my name. My name is Calvin Ko. I am the Research Associate and Program Development at FPCI, and today I'll be act as your master ceremony. As we all know, on the 15th September of 2021, Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States announced the Security Pact cooperations, namely AUKUS. The cooperations will allow Australia to have a nuclear-powered submarine fleet with technology provided and assisted by the US and the UK. The announcements invites different reactions and concerns from Indo-Pacific countries as well as European countries. Today, we are delighted to have three distinguished speakers. Let me quickly introduce you, and of course, Dr. Dino will introduce more details. We have Bapak Abdul Qadir Jailani, the Director General of Asia Pacific and Africa, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Bapak. And then we have Mr. Nguyen Hung Son, Vice President of the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. Welcome, sir. And then from Singapore, Dr. William Chong, Senior Fellow, Regional Strategic and Political Studies Program. And the session will be moderated by the Chairman and Founder of FPCI, Dr. Dino Patijala. Before I move the screen to Dr. Dino, let me give you an overlook about the program of today's discussions. We're going to have a discussion of 60 minutes and followed with a public questions and answer. Those questions, should you would like to answer, please free to put your questions on the live chat on YouTube FPCI. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Dino Patijala to open and moderate the sessions. Dr. Dino.
Thank you very much, Calvin. And I want to say hello to all our panelists for joining us here today. Director General Qadir from the Foreign Ministry of Indonesia. I think you're the only government official here. So thank you for being here. And we have also Pak Nguyen Hung Son from the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. He's the Vice President of Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. He's been posted in Ottawa and Stockholm at the Vietnamese embassy before. We have also Dr. William Chung, who's a Senior Fellow at ICS. Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, and he was previously Shangri-La Dialogue Senior Fellow for Asia Pacific Security at the IISS until January 2020. By the way, on Pak Qadir, I should tell you that he was also ambassador to Canada, where I went to school, and before that he was Consul General in New York. So he's getting all the good posts, yeah. Just like Pak Nguyen, yeah, Sweden, and you're getting England also, Pak Nguyen. Today we're gonna discuss AUKUS, and it's something that it is still hot in the media. The crisis between Australia and France continues, and there's been a lot of response from Asia, from China, but also from Southeast Asia. And today's discussion, we're gonna discuss in greater depth from three Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam. What is their take on AUKUS? And I should say within the last year or so, we've seen some very interesting strategic development. The Quad has been not just move on, but elevated to the leaders level. Right? And we saw at the NATO and EU summit, they have declared that China is a systemic rival, right? And that sort of crystallizes the rivalry between the West and China. And of course, more recently, the announcement of AUKUS, which was rather a surprise to many countries, including to France, but also to Indonesia itself, right? So it's really interesting to see where AUKUS is going and how Southeast Asia perceives the development of AUKUS. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists what is their take on AUKUS. What is the upside and what is the downside? I will start with Director General Kadir. Yeah, Director General, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ambassador Dinupati Jalal. It is my pleasure to be here. I thank to the foreign policy community of Indonesia for having me to discuss an excellent perspective on the recent issues of AUKUS, together with Dr. William Chung and Mr. Nguyen Hung Son from Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. I think if you allow me, I just want to start by sharing with you how our government responds to the announcement of AUKUS. This issue is very important to Indonesia for obvious reason, not only because Australia is our immediate neighbor, because AUKUS also raises concern that armed race that is characterized by increasing power projection in our region is imminent. In response to Australia's decision to acquire nuclear power submarines, we have reiterated our position in regard to the geopolitical rivalry in the region. Indonesia was the first country in the region to remind Australia of its regional obligation to maintain peace and security, while at the same time we emphasize the obligation of all other parties concerned to respect international law. Indonesia has always worked very hard to avoid being dragged into geopolitical tension or being forced into partisan position. And for that reason, Indonesia calls on Australia obligation to maintain its commitment toward regional peace, stability, and security in accordance with the TEC. Therefore, the presence of AUKUS raises our concerns that direct conflict becomes more probable, as this will trigger reaction and further counter-reaction. Once again, we don't want the situation will bring risk for the future of non-proliferation commitment of countries. Speaking of non-proliferation, I would like to approach this matter from two perspectives. First from NPT and second one from Sunfest Treaty. From an NPT, we know that Australia has repeatedly reaffirmed its undertaking not to acquire nuclear weapons. It will remain a non-nuclear weapon state and will continue to meet its obligation under the NPT, including with the IAEA regime. We must look at carefully from this perspective, as the Non-Proliferation Treaty is the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and control regime and one of the most fundamental rules of global security. It is also true that there is no violation of NPT provision because, as we know, NPT only prohibits states that had not possessed nuclear weapons before 1st of January 1967 from acquiring them in the future. Yet, we must recall that the treaty is silent in the use of nuclear energy for military purposes. Therefore, it will raise concern once again regarding the risk of proliferation of fissile materials, because nuclear submarines are powered by what the so-called onboard nuclear reactors. These reactors require uranium that has been highly enriched to a certain degree to be operable. And from Sunfest perspective, I would say that Australia's decision does not really constitute a breach of the Sunfest Treaty. As you know, that ASEAN is not state party to Sunfest. And not only that, Sunfest also does not prohibit the entry of nuclear submarine into the territories of ASEAN countries. One of the articles clearly reaffirmed the rights of all countries under UNCLOS. It means that nothing in the treaty will prejudice any freedom of navigation provided under the UNCLOS. Moreover, the treaty also provides that each ASEAN country may decide for itself whether to allow the visit of foreign ship to its port or navigation through its territorial sea in a manner not governed by right of innocent passage, archipelagic sea lanes, or transit passage. It means at the end of the day, it is up to each ASEAN country to decide whether or not to allow nuclear submarine to pass their territories. So to conclude, I would share that Australia recent action are alarming, of course. No international legal norm appears to be violated for the time being, yet it may set a dangerous precedent. Second, there are legitimate reasons for Indonesia to be cautious. Australia actions will change the geopolitical situation in the region. It will be a destabilizing factor, as there is no such thing as the acquisition of nuclear power submarines without the possibility of sparking of nuclear arms race. The third point I would like to emphasize is that Australia, as the ASEAN very first dialogue partners, must ensure that the implementation of AUKUS will not contribute to any act which may compromise the purpose of the SUNFES. AUKUS need affect the Australia support to the ASEAN-led regional architecture, and therefore a deeper conversation on the partnership are essential to build mutual trust, confidence, and transparency. In this regard, I see the central role of ASEAN. ASEAN centrality remains inevitable to our regional effort to address these challenges. But of course, ASEAN will only be possible to deliver this aspiration if they can maintain its unity and cohesiveness. I thank you, Pa.
Thank you, Director General Kadir, and for the benefit of our audience, Director General Kadir handles Asia, Pacific, and Africa. So I don't know how many countries that is, must be over 50 countries. Yeah, so thank you for your perspective. You express a degree of concern and caution regarding AUKUS, and our next speaker is from Vietnam, Pa Nguyen Hung Son, and I've read the statements made by the Foreign Ministry of Vietnam is more neutral relative to the view of Indonesia. I was wondering if you can explain more about Vietnam's perspective towards AUKUS. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, allow me, Dr. Dino Jala, to express my gratitude for having me on this program. Secondly, the usual disclaimer that nothing I'm saying now is my government's policy. This is entirely my own opinion, and I take full responsibility for what I am saying. Secondly, you asked me the initial reaction from Vietnam on the news of the AUKUS. I think the initial reaction is that of wondering what the deal is all about. There is not much detail at the beginning of the news, and the more we try to study the deal, the more we found out that there are much more than just the nuclear submarine deal encompassed in the AUKUS, the so-called AUKUS deal. Of course, we understand immediately this is not a tactical deal. This is very much a strategic deal that is going to have long-term impact on the regional security. Therefore, I think the very initial reaction is trying to understand the full magnitude, full the details of the deals, and to try to study and anticipate the kind of impact it's going to have on the region, not only on the regional architecture, but also on every other aspects of regional cooperation. We found out that actually there are many other parts of the deal which actually took effect now vis-a-vis the actual submarine deal, which is actually not yet in place. They actually only agreed to talk about the submarine deal, and there is no actual deal as yet. they are going to work in the next 18 months, the AUKUS country, in order to work out the details of the deal. And a lot of things can change, or a lot of things can happen between now and the next 18 months. But there are aspects of the agreement between the three countries which takes effect already as of today. And that is the acquisitions of very rather sophisticated defense capability and military capability to Australia, the access by US military to several of Australia ports, which is going to have immediate impact on the regional balance of power or the military posture by the US in the region. I think those are more consequential or even more have more immediate impact to our region than the Singaporean deal, which is further down the road. Nevertheless, I think it's worthwhile to have regional debate and discussions on the sort of multifaceted impact of such a deal to the regional security, so-called security architecture. First of all, I think it's the immediate impact is on the impression that the US and even the UK is having a long-term commitment in the region, and they are strengthening their allies. And despite their talks of ASEAN centrality, there are a lot of emphasis to their traditional allies and partners. And AUKUS is not just something they've augmented. The Quad is also another new arrangements in the region, which I think is going to have much more consequence to ASEAN centrality than AUKUS. Secondly, I think we talk a lot about the impact on ASEAN. I think that's a deserved talk. ASEAN needs to ask itself a question: why is this happening over ASEAN's head and without ASEAN knowing? And one should ask what is the relevance of ASEAN, and whether the centrality ASEAN talks about and its partners talk about is just lip service, or is it something that they really attend to? I think those are the initial thinking and reaction once one hearing about the news of AUKUS. My government's reaction, I think, emphasizes on the obligations and responsibility of all stakeholders to contribute to peace and stability in the region. So regardless of your defense cooperation's choices, or even your alignment making choices, we emphasize that it's everyone's responsibility to take the right actions and policies to contribute to peace and stability in the region. Also, Vietnam emphasizes the safety and peaceful use of nuclear energy for developmental purposes, which imply we are very concerned if the nuclear energy is proliferated or used for other purposes. So I'll leave it there, and we'll leave it for further discussion.
Thank you. So I think from Vietnam's perspective, it's more wait and see and more neutral, and hopes that this will lead to peace and stability. And I believe this is similar to the views of Singapore, based from the statement made by Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishna at the UNGA, and also recent meeting between Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong with Scott Morrison, where Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said that AUKUS is expected to contribute to peace and stability of the region. William, how does Singapore see the strategic impact of AUKUS here?
Okay, I first of all, Dino and FPCI, thanks for having me here. I also want to say that this all I'm saying is my personal view. I don't represent Singapore, although I'm Singaporean. But I will give three initial points, and I hope I can be brief. The first one is on, like what Mr. Win has talked about, there's both a tactical and a strategic element of AUKUS. If you look at AUKUS itself, it's primarily a three-way deal actually to share nuclear technology with Australia and to develop 8 nuclear-powered submarines for Australia, right? So that's a tactical kind of aspect of the deal. In terms of the strategic element of the deal, we, like what Mr. Win is saying, we will take another 18 months for us to access, and review the kind of the nuts and bolts of the deal before we come to any conclusions about, the strategic implications of AUKUS. But what I want to say is, I think in the popular media reporting, and I'm saying this because I used to be a journalist myself, is that there is a lot of fuss and a lot of frenzy simply because the word nuclear is being used. And I think, we have to continually stress this is about nuclear energy. This is not about nuclear weapons. I mean, it's kind of very basic, but I think the word nuclear actually, gets people to work themselves up into a ladder. And like what Pak Kadir has said, Australia is still in an NPT, and Pak Kadir's Jakarta Post commentary, although you said that there's no such thing as nuclear energy without a possibility of, kind of a nuclear weapons dimension to it. I think you also note that Australia is exemplary when it comes to its obligations under the NPT. So I'm very glad that I read every chapter and verse of your commentary part, which was very educational. So that if you look at the nuts and bolts of the deal, essentially Australia is using what was supposed to be French-designed Barracuda attack class submarines, which were supposed to be diesel electric. They were supposed to be fitted with American systems and American weapons, be them torpedoes or land attack cruise missiles. Essentially, they are changing the nature of the propulsion from diesel electric to nuclear, right? So if you think about it on a strategic dimension, it doesn't really bring that much to the increased capability to the table. Aside from the fact that there's very strengthened coordination and cooperation between the three Anglosphere powers. So I think we, like what the Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan has said, when he was asked about AUKUS in New York at sidelines of the ANGA, he was saying that AUKUS is important, but I think we shouldn't fool ourselves. The bigger question here is not just AUKUS, but the central question is about Sino-American rivalry and how that will be recalibrated, how that will be realigned. So I think that is the major question, which I don't think anyone will be able to answer for now. Second point I want to make is that I believe that AUKUS actually restores, if you are a Star Wars fan, AUKUS actually replaces or restores the balance in the Force, or should I say, restores balance in kind of the regional balance of power. And I think at this very quickly, I can quote the Philippine Foreign Secretary, Teodoro Locsin. We always enjoy his tweets, which are, shall we say, very colorful. But in his reaction to AUKUS, I think he was probably assisted by a group of strategists within DFA when he said that, number one, ASEAN lacks the capabilities actually to ensure peace and security in the region. Number two, AUKUS restores the regional balance of power in the face of Chinese assertiveness. And number three, Secretary Locsin said it was a good thing that ASEAN has a near friend in the form of Australia to respond to these threats. And I think the way that he put it, the way he encapsulated it, I think was probably the most kind of rational and cool assessment of AUKUS. The third point I want to make is that when we talk about arms races, and I'm not totally convinced about the fact that AUKUS actually precipitates an arms race, simply because in arms racing, you have to talk about action-reaction dynamics. And I would argue that AUKUS is a reaction actually to what China has been doing in the past years. If you look at kind of the military spending figures that have been trotted out recently, according to the IISS military balance, in the year 2020 itself, China's increase in military spending outstrips, the increase in spending by all regional states in the Indo-Pacific itself. And of course, we know the rate in which China is churning out destroyers and cruisers and carriers, and China's assertive behavior in various parts of the Indo-Pacific, whether it's South China Sea or East China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. We don't have to, I don't have to spend too much time there. But I would say that AUKUS is kind of a natural reaction actually to Chinese assertiveness. I think I've spoken too much, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. Actually, I want to pick up on that. I think every panelist, including me, agree that AUKUS is not a threat to Indonesia, and it's not a threat to any other Southeast Asian countries, right? So that's not what AUKUS is all about. So I think that part is very much clear. But the big elephant in the room, obviously, is what William just said, China, right? And the statements made by Biden, Morrison, and Boris Johnson during the inauguration of AUKUS did not mention China by name, but Biden did speak about a rapidly evolving threat. Yeah, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison did talk about that AUKUS is not like other powers. It's not to control or to coerce. And I think when Australians talk about a power that wants to control or coerce, I think that was a sign language pointing to Beijing, from their perspective, right? So I'm just wondering, what is the panelists' view that AUKUS is really a strategic pact with China in mind, more so than any other countries, even though they don't say so. Yeah. Any comment on that?
I will attempt, Dino, to
Please
answer that question. Okay, if I was a fly on the wall in, say, the U.S. State Department or the Pentagon, I think that if you read all the statements that the U.S. and its Quad partners have come out with, on the Quad and Indo-Pacific strategy in the past few years, there would be, and I put my money on it, whether it's rupiah or won or Singapore dollars, I put my money on it, is that all these staffers have been told, whenever you prepare a statement on the Quad or free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, do not mention China. And if you read the Quad statements that came out in March this year, the Quad statement that came out, last weekend after the in-person meetings between the Quad leaders, there's no mention of China, when the Quad is mentioned, apart from the fact that they mentioned the South China Sea, right? That's of course implicit in. But I think what they have been very careful in actually doing is to strip out the China element from FOIP and the Quad, and focus on what the Quad members, the 4 Quad countries can actually do with what they call like-minded partners. I think this was a point that was emphasized when US Vice President came to the region. She visited Vietnam and she visited Singapore. And there was a delegation of officials who spoke to think tankers and journalists in Singapore, and I believe also in Hanoi. And I think the emphasis was that the Quad actually wants to work with like-minded countries on very tangible deliverables, whether it be climate change, whether it be COVID-19 vaccines, whether it be infrastructure. And you don't find any mention of China in their statements. And I think it is quite sophisticated because, like Pak Dino is saying, you are dancing around the elephant, but you're not mentioning the elephant. But you are focusing on working with ASEAN member states based on their individual merits. And I think this is it's a good strategy because, you know, obviously, however you want to kind of splice it, you want to communicate it, China is going to take offense anyway. But this actually, you know, not mentioning China directly actually, you know, at least is an attempt to kind of bring down the temperature, the geopolitical temperature in the region. And so when you know, kind of translate that into how AUKUS was communicated, right? Very clearly, when AUKUS was announced in Washington, September 15, the US officials were very quick to say it's not directed at any country, but, you know, anybody who's, you know, has read the papers, you know, would know that it's all about China. But so I think from a communication standpoint, it was a good attempt, but it will take a lot more work actually to actually convince countries in Southeast Asia that it's not about China. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you, and it takes a lot of work to convince China that it's not about China, because, you know, I had a conversation with a government official from China, and you know, he said AUKUS makes it feel more like China is being contained, and he used the word contain from the east, from the south, and from the west. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. Does anybody want to add on this question? Yeah, please.
Well, the answer to your question would be yes and no. Yes, because I think when they enter into this kind of very sophisticated deal, certainly the countries involved have specific scenarios, specific threats in mind, and they are countering those very specific scenario or threats with specific solutions. And in that sense, well, the China threat theory might come up, and they might even have a very specific target, like which aircraft carrier this nuclear submarine should be able to counter to, and so on and so forth. But eventually, looking at the strategic level, the broader picture, I think after all, these countries enter the deal for their own interest. And the interest that they pursue is how to secure their interest in a part of the world which is rising and is quickly becoming the center of economic and political and security of the world. And they must have the tools and they must have the means in order to secure their interest in this rise of Asia, if you want to say. And they're finding that they are running out, or the traditional tools that they have is not enough to ensure and secure their long-term interest in this part of the world. And therefore, they have to create new one. But that's not necessarily against China. Take, for example, their commitment to the rule of law, to the rules-based order, for example, or let's say to the Convention on the Law of the Sea. I often argue that their desire to see an effectively rules-based international order in the Indo-Pacific is legitimate. And that is not against China. If China wants to see that as an act against China, is because China has problem with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, or the rules-based order which China thinks that these countries are pursuing. But by itself, I think what these countries are really pursuing is a stable regional structure which can secure their interests and secure their part of the play in the region. I don't think, and I believe that these countries are for the demise of China. or they are against any particular interest of China. What they are up to is essentially their own national interest, and this is long term. That's
Okay.
my.
Thank you.
Can
Please,
I,
Pak Kadir.
Pak Dino, thank you. If you allow me, Pak Dino, I just want to refer to one point made by William, that he mentioned that AUKUS is essentially it's just a reaction to what happened before. I mean, what happened, what China did in enhancing its military capability. In this regard, I just want to draw your attention to what our government has said. You know, we have said clearly that we deeply concerned over the continuing arms races and power projection in the region. So we are fully aware of this fact that what the so-called arms race has been continuing. It has been undergoing. So that's why we are so concerned, and we do believe that the decision to acquire nuclear submarine, it will escalate the arms race and the power projection. And having said that, we also concerned about the arms race in the sense of non-proliferation. So that's why we also pay attention. And then, in this regard, we stress the importance of Australia's commitment to continue to meet all its nuclear non-proliferation obligation. And the last point, Pak Dino, I think Pak Nguyen mentioned about referring on a rule of law and a regional order. I think this is one point as well that has been addressed in our statement. And if you see that in our statement, we also encourage Australia and other parties concerned to advance dialogue in settling any difference peacefully. And in this regard, Indonesia also underscores the respect for international law, including UNCLOS 1982, in maintaining peace and security in the region. And of course, it implies that we also believe that the importance of supporting and upholding a regional rule of law, as explained by Pak Nguyen. I thank you, Pak Dino.
Thank you. I think the conclusion is that no matter how the AUKUS powers say that this is not about China, I think it's hard for anyone to be convinced of that. Now, the other elephant in the room that I want to discuss is the UK, because I find it interesting that when you talk about Indo-Pacific, you don't really, you think about China, US, Russia, India, and so on, but you really don't think about Britain, right? And yes, Britain is part of the five-power defense arrangement, but Britain is really not seen as a geopolitical player in the region. They're more seen as economically active country with a lot of investments and so on, right? But not necessarily a presence in the geostrategic chessboard. But that has changed. Britain has sent an aircraft carrier to the region, has taken part in naval exercises, up north, and has joined AUKUS. So my question is, are we seeing a new trend whereby Britain wants to be or is becoming a geostrategic player? And how much of a role can they play in this region, and how will the countries in the region accept or view that? Anyone want to take that? Nguyen, please. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, if I may, we are all speaking English, right?
Yeah.
Well, the UK might not be a hard power in the region, but they certainly want to play up their soft power as well. Mm-hmm. Now, the UK has a tradition of being very closely aligned with the US, and yes. The UK is participating in any big strategy by the US. And if we see a strong emphasis of the US in the Indo-Pacific, it's quite natural to see that the UK is following suit and pivoting itself towards the Indo-Pacific as well, especially in the context of Brexit. As a country now that is seen as a global player, hence its global Britain strategy, it is trying to show its presence in regions where they see as of rising importance. And here again, the rise of Asia cannot escape the attractions towards the UK. But look, it's not just the UK or the US is pivoting to the Indo-Pacific. So does the EU, and so does Russia to a certain extent. Not to mention India, Japan. They are all big players here. How can UK afford not to be part of the game in this Indo-Pacific? I don't see that's possible. So expect the UK to come, and expect the UK to be even more active, both in terms of security, economy, and other aspects as well.
Okay. William or Bakadir, any response?
Yeah, just if you allow me, not so much. I think I share the view that at least we know that traditionally that the UK is the close ally with the United States. It is one reason. Another reason we have to be aware that one of the main issue in the region is the issue of South China Sea. And, you know, we're speaking of the South China Sea is not only the interest of the United States. I mean, this is about the freedom of navigation. So I think this is another thing that I believe that all countries in the world, especially those who have a great interest in the South China Sea, will also share the interest to the region.
Yeah, okay, good. William, I want to ask you, why do you think that Australia feels the need to have a nuclear-powered submarine? And also, does this indicate that in the coming years, we're going to see a more intense underwater tussles, you know, between Australia and United States and other powers that have submarines, including China, in our waters? Is it natural to expect that will happen more and more? Two questions to you. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Before I answer that question, Park, can I add some comments about the discussion about the UK earlier?
Please.
Yeah. So I remember at the Shangri-La Dialogue a couple of years ago, you know, the France and the UK always have this, shall we say, very friendly competition to actually show which European country is more involved in the Indo-Pacific. You know, so the UK tends to stress on kind of its historical and cultural connections and trade, of course. And France would say that it has the biggest kind of EEZ, right, in the Pacific, right? And I think it was French Defense Minister Florence Parly who said at the Shangri-La Dialogue, you know, that, you know, the French are here, our aircraft carrier is here, escorted by our destroyers, you know, escorted by, you know, some accompanying ships, and we are here in the Indo-Pacific. And basically, she used that as a platform to kind of nudge her British friends, you know, that, you know, we are bigger in the Indo-Pacific this year than you are. And of course, there's been kind of a bidding war between London and Paris in terms of who is bigger in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, we see that now the UK has kind of got a bit of its revenge because the HMS Queen Elizabeth is now doing its tour of the Indo-Pacific. They are sending smaller ships, surface ships, even to the region. But I think that the kind of the UK tilt to the region is kind of due to kind of bigger systemic factors. Of course, we all know that geopolitical and geo-economic weight is shifting from the west to the east. And of course, the UK post-Brexit is looking for, you know, trade arrangements. So we've seen that they really want in on CPTPP, and they are going to start the process soon. So I think it's a natural evolution, but at the same time, we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because it's a question when it comes to maritime power as to how much presence you can actually, you know, be here in the Indo-Pacific for 365 days a year. So that's my comment about the UK. Now, the question about why does Australia want this kind of enhanced nuclear submarine capability? I think that was your question, Park. It's been highlighted actually if you look at some of the defense documents that Australia has been issuing. It issued a defense white paper in 2016 where it outlines plans to kind of develop a more powerful military deterrent. And we all know, it's all kind of centered on China. So that was 2016. But in 2020, the Australians released a defense strategic update where they basically said, well, it was bad in 2016, and in 2020, it's gotten worse. And basically, they say that the environment has deteriorated even more rapidly than was anticipated in the defense white paper in 2016. So we have to interpret, we have to examine AUKUS based on this context, that the Australians really feel that the security environment has deteriorated. And of course, domestically with the French, there were elements in the deal that the Australians were unhappy with. And so combined with, the French-Australian deal was not quite working out, and it was quite public. And in terms of the bigger external environment, the Australians felt that they really needed something, shall we say, more serious in terms of nuclear capabilities. And of course, the Holy Grail, right? If you want to have an SSN, you want to have a nuclear attack submarine, is American Virginia class. And so they decided to go for the Virginia class. And I think the stars were just aligned with the Americans saying that, hey, we want our allies and partners to, be more distributed, to take more responsibility for the defense of the region, collective defense. And the Australians at the same time looking up north, at the environment, looking at its, big neighbor up north, will say that, hey, we want this capability. So the stars was just aligned for AUKUS to happen. We might not be very happy with the way it was communicated. In particular, the French will not be very happy with the way that it was done. But it was a natural alignment of the stars. And I would think that, not to go into the mechanics of submarines itself, but the big jump from diesel electric to nuclear power is that whereas diesel electrics can stay underwater for like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before they have to come up to snort or to get oxygen. If you watch enough submarine movies, we all know that nuclear powered subs can basically go on indefinitely as long as the crew is fed with rations on board, so they can go on indefinitely. And that, you don't have to be kind of a rocket scientist to figure out, but it means that they can go on longer range, longer endurance, and this means that in kind of a Taiwan contingency, East China Sea contingency, these submarines will be, will have the capability to stay on station for longer and hence be part of that US/allied kind of equation vis-a-vis China. So back to our question, it's not about China, but again, it's all about China. But just a caveat here is that, we won't see this capability, say, until 2035, 2040, and then, we will, that's like 2 decades and from now. So to answer your question about, whether this is going to spark a kind of a nuclear sub arms race, I don't think so, at least not in Southeast Asia. I mean, even if you look at the way that we are doing it, Singapore is in diesel electrics. Indonesia has your Kilo class, which is not nuclear. The only kind of ripple effects that you could see is, of course, in Northeast Asia. I think the South Koreans are now saying that, hey, for the longest time, we've been asking for SSNs from the Americans, but the Americans had said no. But now you said yes to the Australians, so why can't we have SSNs? Why can't we have nuclear-powered submarines? And and perhaps for more conservative elements in Japan, they could be asking the same question, but of course, Japan has what you call a very pacifist outlook when it comes to nuclear energy, and you can call it a nuclear allergy. So, so on balance, I honestly do not see a kind of precipitation in terms of nuclear-powered submarines in the region. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I took too much
No. That's very, very useful. I also need to say, because I know there are a lot of students here, in FPCI conversation with students about AUKUS and also the rising naval presence of European countries. Predominantly, the Indonesian students and public, they're not necessarily comforted or feel more secure to see more new boats, new guns from extra-regional countries around this region or into this region, right? Yes, the United States has long been accepted or established as a Pacific power. You know, and so Indonesians see natural to see their boats and guns around the region. China too, right? But I've often heard that there's something disquieting about, you know, I don't know, British, German, French, and European powers bringing their boats and navies into the region. So it's not necessarily comforting. So that's the message that I hear from our grassroots here. But I want to that leads to my next question, which is the other elephant in the room. So Biden, Morrison, and Boris Johnson talk about the Indo-Pacific, right? But this is a military pact of 3 Anglo-Saxon countries, and there's not one Asian country in AUKUS, you know. So the optics is not necessarily, you know, terribly good, yeah, on this aspect of it, yeah. Anyone want to comment on this? Yeah.
Dino, just a little bit, Dino.
Yeah.
I just want to comment about your last point about this is as an Anglo-Saxon military pact. I just want to say that in many statements or many open sources, you can find that the Australia stressed that this is actually is not a military pact. This is not defense pact. It is just a trilateral security partnership. And why we maintain this, because you know that in this partnership there is no like Article 5 NATO agreement like provision. So they maintain it is not really military pact or defense pact. This is just a security partnership only about how to strengthen the ability of its member to support their defense and security interests. And it is also important that the scope is not only limited in developing of a nuclear submarine.
Yes.
Even this is the primary objective, but also include like a cyber, artificial intelligence, and quantum technologies.
Yes. I take that it's not an alliance like NATO. It is an alliance, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is a defense arrangement, yeah. So anyone else want to comment? Yeah, please, yeah.
Add to that part. I think I can empathize with your students in Indonesia, even in Malaysia and other parts of Southeast Asia. You know, the very genesis of ZOPFAN, right, is that we kind of want a region that is kind of fuss-free, tension-free, conflict-free. Unfortunately, I think if you spend enough time in Singapore, which, you know, some a past Indonesian president has called the little red dot. We are this little boat that is in a very turbulent sea. And I think if you read the works of Lee Kuan Yew, I mean, one of his grand ideas was that, you know, for a small nation state to survive, we need 2 things. We need, number 1, we need the ease of international law. Number 2, we need the involvement of major powers to create that stability in the region so that no major power primus inter pares is in the region. There has to be a balance. So I empathize with the kind of the sentiment among Indonesian students when they see French, German, American, Australian ships on the water or under the water. But I think that sometimes this is actually needed, because otherwise we won't have that balance. And I also want to really second or agree with what Pak Kadir said, that it's a defense arrangement. It's not a pact. But of course, a lot of people would like to focus on the technical aspects of the transfer of nuclear-powered submarine technology. But of course, there's other aspects, like what Pak Kadir was saying, is about AI, it's about quantum technologies. It's far bigger than just that nuclear power element. And there's another element that some people are ignoring, which is that with the AUKUS deal and the deal that the Australians have with the Americans, they are going to actually position more American naval, air, and land assets in Australia for deployment across the region. And I think that is probably something that we will see much sooner than these new subs that we are talking about under the AUKUS deal. And I think this is what we should be studying, instead of getting ourselves into a ladder about submarines that will not come operational to 2035 and 2040, because these deployments are the deployments that will get your Chinese friend into a lot of worry, right? Park, do you know about what do these deployments mean for China? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we all agreed that this is not a military alliance, but I think we all agree also that this is a defense arrangement that aims to maximize strategic advantage over a certain preconceived adversary, right? So it's not against nobody, no, it's against somebody, right? And to maximize their strategic advantage. So in that sense, it is creating stimulus in the geopolitical landscape in the region. But I want to ask any of you, how will ASEAN respond to this? The ASEAN summit is definitely coming up, right? And is this going to be something that's going to be discussed in ASEAN? And will there be an ASEAN statement mentioning, at least mentioning AUKUS, or there will be no such thing? Yeah. Maybe Director General Kadir, because Southeast Asia is under you, would love to hear your comment on that. Yeah.
Thank you. But
Nguyen after that, and well, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. It is obviously not easy to find a common position on this matter. It has been the case since the differences of a strategic interest of ASEAN member states. Some ASEAN member states look at this new challenge from a perspective which tries to see things through longer terms, and others see it from shorter, longer lens. This new dynamic is actually a new geopolitical wind which shifts the direction, and I believe ASEAN needs to prepare itself to deal with any geopolitical climate, particularly in longer term consideration. In our view, ASEAN should be able to respond decisively this matter in accordance with the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific and its guiding principle. And in order to shape regional architecture in its own version, ASEAN should be consistent with its notion of region of dialogue and cooperation instead of rivalry. Despite the absence of ASEAN statement of AUKUS, because until today, we know that ASEAN has not come up with a ASEAN statement, and we don't know what happened in the few days later after AMM. Pessimism should not derail ASEAN. It doesn't mean that ASEAN has been divided and its centrality has been excessively compromised. I wish to suggest we should not look at from that way of thinking. Once again, ASEAN member just has a different strategic calculation on how to have a specific response to this specific new dynamic. I think it is too speculative to assume that ASEAN inaction shows that ASEAN may become irrelevant, because I read in some media suggesting this notion, and then I disagree with that. ASEAN with its all imperfection would be indispensable to all great powers. This is my conviction. They all prefer ASEAN should be in driving seat, despite at the same time they also develop distinctive security partnership like AUKUS, and then no other driver will be trusted by great power, because ASEAN constitutes not a threat to great powers. I think I should stop here, Pak Dino.
Okay, Pak Nguyen, do you have any comment?
Yes, certainly. I think ASEAN should not rush to formulate a united or a response as yet, because I don't think ASEAN would be able to formulate a united, meaningful response to what's going on. I think the first thing ASEAN needed to do is to reflect on itself and discuss internally what's going on, and to try to fully comprehend the magnitude of strategic transformation that is going on in the region. ASEAN probably needs to realize that the next 30 years in the region is going to be completely different from the past 30 years, since the end of the Cold War. ASEAN needed to realize that there has been a fundamental change in the geostrategic environment, and that fundamental change asks for very fundamental and rethinking of how to reinvigorate ASEAN in the new strategic environment. I often argue that ASEAN was able to thrive over the past 30 years because geopolitics gave ASEAN a break, because major powers turned their attention away to the Middle East, to other parts of the world, and China was benign in the region. That allows ASEAN to focus internally and to focus on integration and economic development. The next 30 years is going to be different. Major powers competition returned. ASEAN is not going to easily formulate their agenda and achieve the kind of success it had in the 30 years if it doesn't radically review its role and how to maintain ASEAN's relevance and centrality. Secondly, on the question of relevance and centrality, I think ASEAN really needs to ask itself what agency, what utility it can provide to itself and also to the broader region, whether its conventional role of a convener can be continued to be implemented in the way it had for the past 30 years, whether it can continue to serve as a gatekeeper for not only the countries in the region, which has very diverse interests amid the current situation, but also a gatekeeper for the broader East Asia, if not Indo-Pacific, whether it can continues to build and continue to be a norms setter or norms builder in the region, given that the major powers are increasingly assertive and want to assert their norms, their rules in the region, and whether ASEAN can continue to be an honest broker or if it can step up to be a mediator amid new geopolitical tension. So there are a lot of questions ASEAN needs to really ask itself and find ways to reinvigorate itself. And if possible, to actually promote its own narratives in the region, one that is alternative to a major powers competition. ASEAN has actually attempted to do so by advancing its ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific that is inclusive, that is connected, that excludes no one from this region. I think that's a very important narrative. Now it needs to actionize, put that vision and narrative into action. And I think there are plenty of opportunities for ASEAN to do so, to get away from the zero-sum major powers competition narrative and promote its own cooperations, say, with the European Union, with Japan, India, all countries in the region. I think it's unprecedented that ASEAN this kind of opportunities and attention from its partners, and it is possible for ASEAN to promote such a narrative. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bang Nguyen. William, you have any comment on this before we open to public questions? Yeah.
2 points, I think, on the ASEAN statement. I don't really think there is a need for an ASEAN statement, simply because, as you can see from the public reactions, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, the reactions have been quite difficult. I mean, not difficult, different. And given that they're different, it's very hard for an ASEAN statement to actually capture the essence of what ASEAN thinks about AUKUS. And the fact that there wasn't an ASEAN statement on the Quad, I don't see how there should be an ASEAN statement on AUKUS, but that's my personal view. But I think if you pointed a gun to my head and say, we're going to have a statement on AUKUS, what should the statement say? Then I'll say, take the lead from the Indonesian statement, and the Singaporean statements, which Pak Kadir has actually highlighted very wisely, where he said that the Kamlu statement was, expressing concern, should I repeat that phrase about arms race and kind of developments in the region. And this, should be interpreted as not only talking about AUKUS, but of the kind of military development of other countries, including China and other countries. So that's one element. The second element will be to say that, to use the Singapore formulation, which is any kind of arrangement, defense arrangement, has to contribute to the peace and stability to the region. And I think that's the kind of low common denominator, motherhood and apple pie that we can all agree on in the ASEAN statement. That said, putting the ASEAN statement aside, I think what Mr. Win has said is a really pertinent point, because ASEAN really has to take a hard look at how it wants to reposition itself in the region, because so the big powers, China and the United States, they already understand that ASEAN centrality is etched in stone, right? You cannot go against ASEAN centrality. You have to express public support for it. But while they express public support for it, we all know that they are trying to get around it. So I'll use the analogy. ASEAN is a soccer field in a soccer stadium, and the soccer stadium is central to everything in sports. But China and America and all the great powers, they are playing Formula One outside the stadium, and the Formula One cars are zipping around the stadium and across the stadium, right, in their high-powered engines. And while they say that, hey, the soccer stadium is central, we are doing our own thing outside and even within the stadium. I'm sorry if this is a really poor analogy, but what I'm trying to say is that they are going for ASEAN and against ASEAN at the same time, and basically they want you to be part of their camp. For the US and its allies, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. For China, it's about the China-centric Belt and Road Initiative. So it's like what Mr. Win has said, we really need to reappraise kind of ASEAN's role in the region and how we can reinvigorate kind of serious ASEAN centrality in the region, which we took a humble step with the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and move ahead from there. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I would actually like to pick up from that point that AUKUS has to contribute to peace and stability in the region. Vietnam has said that, and Singapore has said that. The question I want to ask is, how does that really translate into policies? What must happen in order for AUKUS to contribute to peace and stability? What would be the metrics, for example? Would one of the metrics be it cannot lead to an arms race, right? And what would be the other metrics? It cannot, AUKUS should not have develop a confrontation with any regional power in the region, for example, and things like that, right? So I would love to get some answer in policy terms. What would AUKUS have to do in order to contribute to peace and stability in the region? Yeah, anyone want to pick up on that? Okay, I guess we don't have an answer to that. Oh, Pang Nguyen, are you raising your hand?
Oh yeah, well, I can give my initial response. I think, AUKUS countries will continue to do what is in their national interest. What we think they should also do is to support ASEAN centrality and wholeheartedly supports these regions' agendas and priorities. For example, when they come to the summit that you mentioned about that is happening soon, they should not take away the limelight or the bandwidth of regional summitry to discuss what is not in this overall region's interest. For example, vaccines, for example, economic recovery or human security in light of the pandemic. And they should not take away the bandwidth, that valuable bandwidth, to focus on, let's say, non-proliferations or arms controls or whatever. So pay attention to ASEAN's centrality and ASEAN's agenda settings role, and do try to contribute to that common agenda of this region. I think that's the policy part, and should not use ASEAN's created forum for a place to quarrel among another or to chit chat with China and so on. I think that would be the policy suggestion I think would be viable in the diplomatic front. On the security front, I think what they should try to do is to be transparent on what their intention is and what they plan to do and what's their upcoming plans to do. Transparency, verifiable transparency with ASEAN at the center can be something that they can contribute in order to ensure strategic communications, strategic trust, and stability in the region.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'd like to second that point, Park. Almost by default, by definition, when you're talking about submarines, it's very hard to say that I'm going to guarantee you that there's going to be no arms racing. But you know, there's a reason why submariners are called the silent service. You do not see where they are, what depth they are, which coastline they're hugging at. So by definition, it's very hard to put on paper that, you know, I can guarantee, you know, where the US and Australia and the UK can say, I can guarantee you there's no arms racing, because it's not a one-person game, right? It's a game that is played out in the US sphere versus the China sphere, and how China reacts to AUKUS is completely out of the control of Canberra, of London, and of Washington. But I think, like what Mr. Win was saying, is that I think a humble step here is, you know, of course, to really not just repeat, you know, the importance of ASEAN centrality, but actually work it out, you know, actually that it is important. And number two, actually, I think, like what I've mentioned earlier, transparency. I think the Australians are doing a round of regional capitals trying to explain what AUKUS is, you know, both in the tactical and strategic dimension. I think that is probably quite enlightened, and it's quite wise for them to try to, you know, try to explain it, even if you don't agree with it, at least explain it and be transparent about what are some of the intentions. And preferably, if this is done behind closed door, it would help to enhance transparency here. Yeah.
Is it possible for ASEAN to request special confidence building measures between AUKUS and China? Is that too much to ask, or is that a possibility?
I guess it's a suggestion that can be made at the East Asia Summit or even ADMM Plus. So I agree. It's definitely something that ASEAN can propose, but whether China and US-led AUKUS would say yes is an entirely different question altogether. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take some questions now from the audience. We have a question from Alfonso from Melbourne, in fact. Do we really think Australia, even with the backing of the United States and UK, pose a real threat to China with these submarines, given that they will not be finished for at least a decade? Anyone want to answer that? I think that.
Yeah, I mean, thanks,
William, go ahead.
Thanks, Alfonso. I mean, that's my point, right? That's my point. Like, so we are working ourselves into a tizzy about submarines that are not going to come online until like I'm 80 or I'm 85 years old. So that's the question. But again, there are two elements. When we could always say that until the Australian submarines come operational, there's nothing to prevent the Americans from actually stationing some of their submarines in HMAS Sterling or some Australian base and giving Australia that kind of near immediate kind of capabilities. A second thing is that, and I think what Pak Kadir and I have talked about earlier, it's not just about the nuclear submarines, but it's about the increased interoperability between the United States and Australia, the forward positioning of US assets in Australia, that should be deemed to be more threatening in the eyes of China than just the nuclear subs themselves. Yeah.
Okay, question from Abigail. I think this is for Pak Kadir. Would you say that AUKUS is proof of NPT's failure in envisioning the future of nuclear use in military? Would amending NPT be a solution to avoid setting a bad precedent? Yeah.
Thank you. This is quite a pertinent question. My answer would be very brief, that the fact that NPT does not really address the issue of the use of nuclear materials for non-peaceful uses or for military purposes other than weapons, I would say this is a kind of loopholes. I think this is something that the international community should look at. I know this is not easy thing. I think this is we have to look at it in the longer term. But once again, I just want to add, Pak Dino, because Pak William mentioned as well earlier that it is true that the likelihood of the acquisition of nuclear weapons by ASEAN countries are very low at this. It's not easy. It will not create arms race among ASEAN countries or whatever. But we must be aware that this will create a dangerous precedent at the global level. This is our concerns due to of the loopholes as the question posed. It will also encourage non-nuclear weapon state to have access to highly enriched uranium that will pose the risk to a global effort of non-proliferation. So what we are really worried about is not really about the proliferation of nuclear weapons, but the proliferation of highly enriched uranium to non-nuclear weapon states. I thank you.
Okay. We have a question from Zachary Tan from National University of Singapore. Do the panelists foresee China escalating Sino-American tensions in their potential response to AUKUS? Anyone?
Well, if I can take that,
Please.
I don't think AUKUS is going to fundamentally change what China has already planned with regard to its naval power enhancement. It has a very concrete plan to enhance its naval power, to project itself to become a global naval power in the next decades or so. And they have been implementing that plan with or without the reactions from the region or from the international community. So I do not think that this AUKUS is going to fundamentally alter what China is going to do with regard to its military power. What they will possibly instigate reactions from China is on the diplomatic front. China is probably going to portray this in various fora as an alignment or alliance against China's rise, and that's probably it. But fundamentally, I don't think that has any implications on what China is going to invest or the kind of equipment it's going to augment in the future.
Okay. We have a question from Dev, Jakarta. I think this is for Pak Kadir, the only one who can answer this. If Indonesia is concerned about AUKUS as it may escalate the arms race, what can Indonesia do to balance China's dominating power in the South China Sea without the intervention of other major powers for at least a decade?
Thank you. My response, I think I have mentioned earlier that we prefer to deal with the situation in accordance with the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, because we prefer to deal with how to manage the rivalry between the two powers through creation of a region of dialogue and cooperation, and we don't see that to do something like to balance of power or something, but we prefer to have it through dialogue and cooperation.
Okay, spoken like a true diplomat. Maybe last question comes from me. We have only about 7 minutes left, right? So in the last 2 years or so, since the COVID crisis, right, do the panelists see that the state of geopolitical rivalries, the hot peace, is rising, or more or less the same, right? So I would love to get your take on this, yeah. So with all the Quad, the EU NATO meeting with the US, with AUKUS, with tension on the Taiwan Straits, and so on, and North Korea firing missiles again, and so on and so on. You know, I'm just wondering if you think that the geostrategic rivalry, it has been rising steadily over the last 2 years, or you think this is really the new normal? Yeah. Anyone?
Well, if I can take on that,
please.
I indeed see that there is more rivalry, and that rivalry has become structuralized into very concrete policies. Not just by the US, but also by China in its response with its policies. And this is something of a structure. That means we have anticipated this is going to be a long-term thing. No longer, I think, is the very harsh verbal exchange between US and China that we saw in the Trump administration, where information warfare or the verbal exchange was very harsh between the two countries. And now the competition is getting more concrete into actual policies, into actual economic, trade, or technology and strategic policies. And I think this is going to be very consequential, and this is going to have long-term impact on the regional structure. So to answer your question in a short way, yes, it has become more structuralized and long-term and consequential.
Thank you. Okay, if I can attempt to answer that part. I think if you've been looking at the news in the past 24 hours, you know, the return of China's Meng Wanzhou, you know, the Huawei chief financial officer, back to China, and the sentiment expressed by ordinary Chinese people to her return. And that the fact that it's a conspiracy by Canada and the United States and the West to detain her on illegitimate grounds. And I'm not going to go on the case of Huawei itself, but you can see that just based on the sentiment that's expressed by ordinary Chinese to her return, that we are not going to go back to the good old days, of the Obama era, where there was competition between the US and China, but it was on a lower temperature. It's way on a higher temperature today. We thought that the Biden administration will give us a bit of respite, but if you look at the kind of policies that Biden and his administration have adopted, it's essentially kind of variations on the same theme compared to Trump. I mean, the language might be different, but the substance of the policies are actually very similar, right? In terms of like what Mr. Win was saying, challenging China on a kind of a structural kind of elements, whether it's technology, whether it's alliances, whether it's on trade. We are on an entirely different plane right now, and I wouldn't call it a return to a Cold War, but I call it a Cold War-like in the way that it's being done. And I think that the wiser councils of countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, Singapore, I don't think it's being heeded in Washington or Beijing. The call for stability, a call for restraint in terms of arms racing. It's a kind of existential challenge that ASEAN will have to face going forward.
Okay. Pak Kadir, you have any final comments?
No, I'm done. I'm good.
Okay, very well. Well, I want to say thank you to all of you for your honest and insightful comments. This has been fascinating and also a learning experience for me. I think if anything we can agree on is that AUKUS does not threaten Indonesia or Southeast Asia. Although the Indonesian view is we need to see this very cautiously and see where this goes. And we also see some nuanced differences and perceptions from the three Southeast Asian countries on AUKUS. And what is certain is that there's much more to learn and unveil from the AUKUS development. I think we're only seeing, so far the submarine nuclear deal. We are yet to see what kind of quantum computing and AI cooperation will evolve and so on. But the biggest question is how AUKUS will fit into regional security. And I think for me, that was the most interesting question, especially in terms of how this will be expressed in policy terms, right? And I think it's important to develop what would be the metrics for us to judge whether or not AUKUS will fit into regional security and stability, right? And how will the strategic play between AUKUS and China evolve? I think that's also a very interesting question because even every AUKUS countries deny this is by China. I think that is a hard sell because the common perception is that this was a defense arrangement with China in mind, right? So with that, I want to thank Director General for Asia Pacific and Africa, Pa Kadir, and we thank him for his valuable time. We thank Pa Nguyen from Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for his wise comments, and also for William from ICS Yusuf Institute for your analysis. Yes, thank you very much. I hope this is useful to all of you as it has been to me. Thank you, and see you at the next FPCI Public Forum.
Thank you
very much.
Again, thank you to all the panelists and also Dr. Dino for moderating the sessions. And again, I also want to thank to you as the audience and the members of the public who participate to the discussions. We hope again that the session will benefits you with insights and perspectives. And please follow our next program by following our social media on the Twitters or Instagram at FPC Indo. I repeat, at FPC Indo. Or you can go to our Facebook page at Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. Or if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, you can go to our website at www.fpcindonesia.org. Again, thank you. My name is Calvin Ko. Thank you for your participating and see you on the next sessions.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Okay.